and we'll pick them up. With that said, I want to welcome our fantastic panel today. First, my co-moderator, David Rubinstein, who's the Chief Operating Officer of D2 Emerge, as well as the Editor-in-Chief at SD Times, which is one of the fantastic media partner of PlatformCon.
Well, thanks.
Also, thank you. Welcome, David, and thanks for doing this with us. Also, welcome Nicki, who's the CEO and CTO at OpenCredo, and our repeat speaker from both PlatformCon 22 and PlatformCon 23. Thanks for doing this, Nicki.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And then, yes, welcome also to Manjunath Bhat, who's a VP analyst, DevOps and software engineering at Gartner, and first-time speaker at PlatformCon. Welcome, Manju.
Thanks for having me, Luca.
And finally, Kaspar from Grünberg, CEO at Humanitech. Good to see you again, Kaspar.
Good to see everybody.
Fantastic. All right, so I think we can get right into it. Just to set a little bit of context, why we're doing this. So obviously we just came out of PlatformCon 23 last week. It was on Thursday and Friday. It was a lot of fun. For anyone here, I don't think there's many people that don't know what it was, but PlatformCon is the #1 platform engineering conference. And really the main event of the platform engineering community throughout the year. I'm going to share a few links throughout, but just a few numbers from PlatformCon 23. We had over 22,000 signups and 15,000 attendees. That's a kind of like a best guess attendance that we can get right now. We had something crazy, like over 20,000 views just across 168 talks. We had 5 tracks, hundreds of threads and Q&As that were started in the platform engineering Slack by speakers, and a lot of new exciting topics, I think, that came out. One that I've highlighted throughout the event was platform blueprints, and maybe something that we can get to speak about today a little bit as well. As an example, I'll share a link here, but we had one of the second most watched talk at PlatformCon with over 1,000 views was actually the one by the McKinsey team on reference architecture. So it's really great to see that the community received the blueprints track as well as we hoped it did. That was like one of the 2 new tracks that we presented this year. And so all in all, PlatformCon, really, really fun. And so what we want to do today is recap a little bit. I'd love to hear from the panel, kind of like what were your highlights from the event? What did you enjoy the most? And then we'll get into specifically, dive a little bit deeper on the specific talks that you all gave, and what are the trends that we see popping up in the space broadly and in the community specifically. So maybe before we get to the question, just like a quick round, maybe starting with you, Nicki, any specific highlights from your end, anything that struck you that you thought was interesting from the event?
Well, I mean, I think just the sort of sheer volume of talks, there's so much to sort of on offer there. I thought it was a great selection of a variety of things there. I actually quite like Charity Major's talk, if I'm honest. One of her talk on sort of DevOps is not quite dead. I think just calling out actually like platform engineering and the intersection between sort of DevOps and platform engineering is really evolving. And I think this is something that we're kind of seeing as we kind of move along here. And I think it's quite nice when these things get, sort of called out and just to kind of explore those areas. So I thought that was really good. I really enjoyed, some of the talks out there on practically, sort of how to do things and how people have done different things in different contexts. Because I think it's good to get a different view on a variety of different ways that people have built the platforms and what they look like, because there is no one size fits all. So the sheer sort of, I think, breadth of that was something that impressed me.
Fantastic. Manju, what about you?
Yeah, I think I enjoyed a lot of talks. So one specific, I think for me, the biggest takeaway was, in fact, I think what I've seen in the past year, right, is gone from being platform engineering for developers, that's application developers, to now being, platforms or platform engineering for multiple personas, right? So you did have quite a few talks targeted at data engineers. So that was a welcome change, right? So I think for me, that's been one of the big shifts I've seen. So it's no longer just talking about platform for just one persona who is the software developer, but I think in future, you're going to start seeing more of this. The other thing which I think I also liked a lot was a lot of end user case studies. I think that's really good validation. A lot of our clients, like I know I'm representing Gartner, so lots of Gartner clients look for peer insights right now. So peer validation, how are their peers implementing platforms? So that was really nice to see. And for me, I think my if I were to call out one talk, it would be from Manuel Page, right? So he spoke about team topologies, and we see a really good intersection. And in fact, team topologies having a multiplier effect on platform engineering conversations, the whole discourse around platform engineering.
Cool. Anything from you, Kaspar?
Well, I think just echoing what you said, that for me, it's always the most interesting to see the actual examples. Bull.com gave great insights. I continue to enjoy Mercado Libre's take on platforms. These actual examples of people that have done it and seen the problems and actually share those problems with the community. I think that's just such an incredibly valuable help for everybody. And so those were the ones that were most interesting for me. I really enjoy how we are moving, so the early years of platform engineering, and I include myself, I think we were throwing buzzwords primarily, but I think we're slowly moving beyond that. And it's been much more concrete. It's much less vague, and I hope I can include myself there at least a little bit. And so that's something that I found is a sort of a big change. The quality overall has significantly increased in my observation.
I guess I can go. Okay. Yeah, a couple of things struck me that I thought was really interesting. I only first heard the term platform engineering maybe a little over a year ago. This is your second event now. And just the numbers of people that are interested in this topic really struck me as being kind of a wow moment for me. That was like, there's a whole lot of interest in this topic going on right now. But the other thing is, I like the fact in the program that, most people who come to conferences to learn something were told, we need platform engineering by the bosses. Go ahead and we want to implement it in a month. Learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can. That's basically what conferences exist for. So the fact that there was enough of the introductory stuff, as well as people who already started down the path to learn a little more, get a little more depth out of it, I thought just the well-roundedness of the event struck me as being something. And just to echo on something that somebody else had said, we've seen this with Agile, we've seen it with DevOps, we've seen it with value stream, now we're seeing it with platform engineering, this business of scaling it beyond the development teams. And organizations want to try to implement these things higher up and all throughout their organizations. Agile, it's almost like the Atlassian method of bottom up. We'll just sell to developers and then they'll spread the word and it'll go viral. That's kind of been what's happened, I think, with Agile and DevOps and now platform engineering, value stream management. Same thing, started in the development shop and now the bosses see it. And it all goes towards this message that we're hearing all throughout the industry of bringing business value and IT together, getting them both on the same page so that what IT is working for is to deliver the value that the business needs. And platform engineering certainly is one step in that to get development teams, at least for now, started in bringing that value together. And that struck me as well. So that's my take.
Fantastic. Yeah, feel free to jump in with questions as well if you like.
Yeah, well, I think you went around and asked a lot about what people's thought were the best talks and what have you. I'm kind of curious to know what session was there that anybody thought that, oh, gee, I didn't think we'd be going down that road, but maybe somebody came in at a different kind of an angle that people were looking at. Did anybody get any sense of that through the program? Just throwing it out there.
I've maybe one thing, Manju already hinted at this, but it's so interesting to see how the data world is actually grabbing onto this and say, hey guys, we actually also need platforms. That is actually something that was fascinating to me because I have really this sort of a little shallow lens of the large scale enterprise application development angle, but to see that they're, thinking product first, the thing that Manuel Pais and friends have been preaching for years, but thinking about that product mindset, that stuck me. That I think it's so interesting that more and more parts of the ecosystem are picking this up now, right?
Interesting. So one other thing that kind of struck me is the very large turnout that you had at this event, which is fantastic. And all I've been hearing is people saying, oh, they're burnt out on virtual events. I don't have the patience for that anymore. Everybody wants to see everything come back live and things like that. So is perhaps that in the future of this event that we may take it in person someday, or what are the thoughts there?
You were in person, right? How was that? Because I've never had a PlatformCon event in person experience.
Well, I never have either, and certainly not this time. But no, I thought the experience was great. It all depends on the platform. And I thought it was fantastic, especially running multiple tracks and being able to jump in and jump out of things. I thought that part of it was great.
You were in person, Nicki, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things. So we had a London watch party, and I thought that was a really great sort of addition to the virtual side of things. I think the virtual side does, as someone said, actually allows a lot more people to be part of it because not everybody can necessarily come to an in-person conference. However, we were at our offices actually doing a watch party in London, and that was really great because we got to sort of watch some talks and then actually have a discussion afterwards and have a panel and stuff as well. And I think there's always something to be said about sort of in-person events. It's great. I think to have both is actually is quite nice, and the watch party is I think a different way of doing it. Sometimes you have conferences where they're in person and they're virtual at the same time, and that can actually be quite challenging. But the watch party, where you can consume at your leisure, you can choose the talks and then discuss particular topics. I think that's a really great combination, and it would work well for us.
And I think what's so powerful, I think it's so important that PlatformCon becomes, something that many people actually shape and take part of, right? And the fact that, now you have different cities and different teams actually organizing local stuff. That's so great, right? I think we had that in Barcelona, we had that in San Francisco, we had that in Austin, you did that in London, and that gives such a personal touch, and it's really something that the community picks up, which I think that's so powerful.
Nice. Maybe let's get to, I'd love to cover a little bit kind of like what the three of you also have talked about in your talks. So starting with you, Nicki, you talked about why it's so hard to create a great platform as a product. I think it's interesting because platform as a product is something that we already discussed widely last year, but still seems to be a struggle for some reason. So could you, why? Why do you think that is?
So just to sort of recap. So for the main idea behind a platform as a product is based on the product thinking mindset. And, that's not new, it's been around for a while. Many organizations, especially if they are sort of product focused, have done this for a while. But when it comes to sort of successfully applying that to a platform sort of context, this is where we've observed, people still seem to struggle. And I think it's once we get beyond some of those sort of typical, the success stories out there, and it gets into the wild, so to speak, and people are trying to actually apply product thinking in this context, is that we run into a little bit of challenges. So I think one of the key reasons is because, in a way, this doesn't come naturally to organizations that are trying to apply this in an internal context. So, for example, like some of your internal users are not always seen as real users, and the platform is not perceived as a real product because it's not targeting end users. And as a result, when people try to apply the product thinking mindset to the platforms, it gets mixed in, I think, with some of their sort of traditional ways of working and the assumptions, not necessarily intentionally. This then creates a few blind spots and stumbling blocks along the way, and this is the thing that tends to trip people up. So by way of concrete example, the talk, we go through a few things, but your internal users are often sort of taken for granted, and they aren't maybe afforded the same sort of considerations that you would get if you were typically working with end consumers. So assumptions then get made about things like maybe their level of ability. So you might say, well, they're just developers, it's just internal, so they should know how to configure a YAML file, so we're just going to give that to them as an interface. Or they might sort of make assumptions that we know what's best for them. We understand as internal sort of engineers that this is the best CI/CD approach, and so we kind of force that onto them. And it's these type of things where the internal user isn't quite treated in the same way as an external user, where these areas come in. And the problem with that is that you generally wouldn't make these assumptions when you're working with normal end user. You'd have feedback, you would have surveys and all these type of things, which give you that great feedback. But when it comes to internal users, sometimes that isn't the case. So when this product thinking mindset isn't applied properly, it can result in organizations sort of deviating off the main product thinking sort of path and detouring into the ditches of assumptions, and then end up with problems which result as out of that.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you see any trends or proxies where you say, yeah, this type of organization is the one that tends to fall into that anti-pattern more, or do you just see across the board?
I think some of the bigger challenges that I see are from sometimes the bigger enterprises where they have really additional big IT organizations, and they have quite siloed sort of structures, and they're still in a mindset of how they think projects should be run, and to try and apply this product thinking mindset is quite difficult for them. And so I'd say the slightly larger enterprises that are still operating in a bit more of a segregated way is where some of these challenges are more apparent.
I have a question. Yeah. I'm curious to know why, if you're looking at it for internal customers, there's less of a feedback loop than external. What do you think the dynamic is there that's preventing people from going to their bosses and saying, hey, we need to get something different here?
So I think as I sort of trying to say before, I think because it's internal users, it's developers for developers. So sometimes the developers will think, I am a developer, I know how these people should be able to, work. And so they make assumptions without actually asking the developers themselves. So the whole thing with the product thinking mindset is you need to engage your end users. What do they actually need in order to do their job? But if you think you know best, or you think, we'll just do it this way, we don't really need to ask them. They're generally a captive audience, so they can't really go anywhere. Whereas if you were, if you had an iPhone or AWS services, people can use their feet, and if they don't like it, they walk. But when your audience is captive, I think there's a lot more, not as much effort sometimes is put into that. And that is changing, but it is a mindset change that needs to happen within organizations.
Very interesting.
Yeah, they might. Can I add one thing there? So, which is, I think what we've found is, so people want business agility, right? So that's what they're willing to pay for. But I think the disconnect that exists in most organizations is they don't really they don't connect that business agility is a factor of developer productivity, right? So in many cases, if you make that connection, that developer productivity directly translates to business agility, you would be more than willing to make that investment, right? So people appreciate how important developer experience is to like digital transformation, and has in fact a transformative effect on organizations. So that appreciation is missing, I guess.
Yeah, and it's quite fascinating that after all, I mean, yeah, that's just maybe perception, but I mean, there's clear evidence, at least from where I stand, that you should have a product manager for the platform. That I'm not sure why there should be a discussion. You should absolutely do that. We should apply normal standards. We should. I'm a big believer in platform as code, for instance. You should. This thing should be testable. You should have quality assurance. You should have user feedback. All of these things. But we're still, I think, far away from that in most settings. And your talk very much resonated with me, and I like this idea of the imprisoned users. That immediately makes sense.
Cool. Okay, so jumping to your talk, Manju. So you were part of the impact track, which is the other new track beside the blueprints. And I think the interesting thing about that track was it was kind of geared towards the C-level, the executives, and to help them understand what is the ROI of building these platforms. But the interesting thing is, I think a lot of people also consumed it who are actually the practitioners who are trying to figure out, hey, how can I communicate the value for other stakeholders, specifically to get executive buy-in. And so I think maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Like, why do you think there is such a challenge for platform engineers to communicate the value of the platform and align internal stakeholders, right? Because I feel like a lot of times people get stuck or hold up on the tooling questions, right? Like, oh, if I pick this tool over that tool, that's gonna mean success over failure. But oftentimes, really, it's more of a cultural question, right? And that's really what determines whether platform engineer initiatives fails or is successful.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you bring up something interesting that we've not double clicked on, right? Which is you need both a bottoms up view as well as a top down view. So the bottoms up view would be, how do the practitioners, how do the people building the platform communicate the value of their work, right, to the top management, to C-levels? Because ultimately, all of these things need funding, right? You need to build teams, because if you're going to build a platform, that platform has to be treated as a product. So you need to create new roles, right? So we got to justify investment in all of these roles, practices. In fact, you might even have to hire new skills, right? You might have to hire new kinds of, in fact, it's not enough for us to just take existing, let's say, say ops people and say, okay, from tomorrow onwards, you are going to be a platform engineer, right? So there's going to be retraining, right? So it's not like they can't become, but they'll have to undergo something like a retraining exercise, much like SREs would. Now, top down is also equally important, because top down is more like, so for instance, it's the same conversations one would have where they might say, why are we doing DevOps, right? So why are we spending all this money? What's the ROI on it? So the whole conversation on top down is the C-level wants to see, where is the money being spent? How is it being spent? What is the organization getting out of it? So I think what we did through my talk, Luca, was we presented, like, as you probably saw, right, an enterprise value equation. And we said, because the platform is not intended for a single audience, we start with, it's a 4-step process, right? We start with identifying what the stakeholder concerns are. So you might have multiple stakeholders. So we call it, a multi-factor equation. So depending on who you're targeting, so you identify their concerns. Is basically like a sense and respond phase. So once you identify their concerns, then you go to the next phase and say, okay, how do we respond to that concern? How do we address that need, right? So right there, you might think of building value enablers. In some cases, it could be a full-fledged internet developer platform. And I think Nicki also mentioned in her talk, right? It could be as simple as a wiki maybe, right? So it depends on what that stakeholder needs, the concepts of thinnest viable platforms. And also, I think here it's important to call out that these platforms are demand driven, right? So it's not like we build it and they will come. So we really go by where the demand lies. So once we do that, we then build a value story, right? So we say, we have these value enablers. Let's see how they create an impact on stakeholder needs, right? So that's the third step. We measure the impact they're having on real stakeholders. And finally, we basically say, platform engineering is not a one and done exercise, right? So it's going to be about continuously improving the product, and seeing where the gaps are, and also looking at not just stakeholder needs, but how the organization as a whole benefits. So I think that completes the loop. And that's how one should communicate the business value of platform engineering. So that was the thesis of the talks.
Very interesting. Yeah. Any thoughts on this, Nicki?
I think one of the things that we've seen sometimes can be helpful as well in this area to try and align, sort of business and lower down is to things like OKRs and stuff like that. So when your top level business has defined, look, this is what the goals of the company are and where we're kind of aiming. It's easy. It can sometimes be easy to align some of the platform engineering initiatives underneath that. For example, to say, well, if we're trying to get to market faster, then our platform engineering initiative will allow that to happen because, key results of, measuring actually this makes it faster to get there provides a way to do a little bit of that linking. So it doesn't always work in all contexts, but I would agree. It's really important to link up what the business is trying to do and how that works on the ground. And OKRs is one way we found that can also be handy, just to add that.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do also with measurement, right? They often just, there's no way for them to actually show what what are we actually optimizing against. And as long as that isn't clear and we're not actually measuring it. So I don't know who said that a couple of years ago. Somebody said, like, measure the amount of thank yous you get from your engineering group. That's one measurement, but it's at least one. If you don't measure, you don't know what. And I think one of the reasons also why so many people are interested in this, Manju, is that now we're in the hype phase, right? Everybody says, like, platform engineering, you can go to your executives, if not this year, next year, you'll have your budgets. But the question is, in 24 months from now, you are going to have to justify what you did with those budgets, right? And the shit will hit the fan. Yeah. You will need to show what you did. Otherwise, we've wasted a lot of money on, hot new initiatives. And so that is a very, very important question.
And I think, I'll just make one comment. I really like what Manuel Pace said in his talk, right? Which was you optimize for outcomes, not just for internal processes, right? Platforms are not a way to optimize internal processes. They're a way to optimize for business outcomes. Right? I thought that was a very powerful message.
Well, it's actually both, isn't it? Yeah. Same thing with like a value stream initiative. You're gaining efficiencies in your process, but the ultimate goal is being able to deliver the outcome with the value that you desire.
Yeah, and exactly that transition is the difficult one, right? So in the end, the actual business side cares about time to market. And then you translate that into the IT world, it's lead time. But then, why do we have long lead times? Well, because in the end, it's a sum of things, right? It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts to a certain degree. And it's these little things that then actually roll up and slow us down. And many people, and it is super hard to actually articulate the problem because it's many small problems, which is again another re-emphasize of the fact that it needs to be a product, because only if you're demand driven will you get optimal allocation of your focus versus the actual return of investment situation on the ground. Otherwise, if you're just sitting and say the most tangible example for me is you have a platform team saying, okay, what are the resources that we're going to support? 4 flavors of Postgres, and then this, and then this, and then this. instead than saying, okay, what's the demand? The demand is coming in. Oh, it's coming 3 times. Okay, let's think about making this a golden path, making it repeatable, making it, all of that. And that's a little bit of the dance, making sure you're not actually just building stuff for the sake of building, something we would never do for a customer application. Exactly what Nicki said, because the customer, I love that term, because the customer isn't imprisoned. Yeah, that's such a great way of phrasing it.
Yeah, I think to David's point, I'll just clarify. Maybe there's a much bigger point, right? When you optimize for business outcomes, what you're really doing is systemic optimization, right? You're optimizing the entire value stream. But if you're focused on improving, let's say, internal processes, you might be tempted to optimize locally, right? And local optimizations can be dangerous. I think that was sort of the inherent message there, right?
I think it's trying to find that balance, isn't it? Because there's some local optimizations that will help, but as you say, finding the whole value stream and how that can be improved is important.
Right. Well, like you said,
Kaspar,
I'm sorry,
David, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
All right. Well, I was actually, you derailed my thought. So, at my age, that happens a lot. Thoughts come in and they go out before I can grab them.
Don't worry about it. So I was just going to jump in because, Kaspar, you mentioned golden paths, which interestingly was also the title of your talk. So, and how to scale them. So, I mean, you kind of touched on okay, what it is and how can, ops platform engineering teams figure out what the, how to design them and what developers want, but then how do you scale them from that?
Yeah, so how do you scale them? I think so I looked at this from a couple of different perspectives. I think the thing that I wanted to highlight is that I think we still think about that idea of golden paths in too one-dimensional, if you want to put it like this. What is a golden path? In my opinion, it's just a repeatable pattern that people can use, that if they use it, leads to a higher degree of standardization. So they can, if they use it, it's convenient to use, low cognitive load, and it doesn't increase the amount of maintenance surface, if you want, or it keeps things in nice and tidy. So if I'm today ask 9 out of 10 platform engineers, hey, what would you want to start with, right? What's your golden path you're starting with? Or Netflix calls it paved roads. We have a couple of ways of describing this. Then they would say, we have a service template, and at the creation of the service, we clone the service template, and then we standardize day 0. And that's a great thing. If you don't do that yet, absolutely, there are no questions asked. Totally correct. My observation was that it is one-dimensional in that it is focused on a very small part of the actual life cycle of both the workload and the resources, because from that second onwards, you actually have sprawl taking over again. And if your service is around for 1,000 days, only standardizing day 0 probably doesn't yield the full return on investment that you could yield. I'm a big fan of that idea, and I know I've been repeating myself on that, but dynamically actually treating every single day like day 0 and generating the app and infrastructure configurations dynamically, because that allows us to then build golden paths at scale. Every time you have something already, but you want to add another workload, you have something already, you want to add another resource, and it allows us to recompile and clean up. And that idea of, however you do this, thinking about system design as your product should standardize by design, by using it, by following the golden paths, it's basically cleaning up after itself. So that's the one thing. The other thing is, how do you do that at scale? How do you actually take that product mindset approach and you allow the platform to grow almost in a decentralized way? And what we've seen over and over again, and the bull.com people also gave a great example of that, where they said our first platform was too rigid, the road was too paved, and we we had golden cages basically. And then we said, okay, well, people should be able to actually go off the path, which is why we're calling it a path. And then I think the interesting thing about scaling these things is, okay, your paths are only good if they are actually walked, right? And if somebody, goes off the path, that could be your next golden path, right? So how do you now take the situation that the user explores new territory in order to decentrally have them participate in building your platform? Which is where I'm coming back to that idea of platform as code. Everything should be code, and the new path should be maybe a merge request to the global platform, where the platform team can say, oh, a RangoDB, that's interesting. That is something that we can support going forward. And actually thinking about that idea of paths as something that is created because the users walk them. And depending on how they walk them, we are going to encompass that and make it part of the global offering. And that's something that, fascinates me. I'm not sure many organizations are there yet. I'm not even sure whether, we'll see that going mainstream, maybe, maybe not. But it's something that from a conceptual point of view, I find quite fascinating.
Yeah, that gets back to the point that popped back into my head that I wanted to make about this notion of continuous improvement. You can't just have a rigid platform and say, this is what we're using, no variations, no deviations. You have to allow for people to find other paths, as you say, find things that work better, make you better, and you're constantly looking to get better. So that was the point I was going to make. Continuous
improvement, continuous standardization, and making everybody actually contribute. Almost that idea of inner source, but now applied to the platform world, right?
Yeah, interestingly enough, we actually had at the Platform Watch party, inner sourcing came up as a topic there. And one of the other things which came up alongside that is not necessarily just doing inner sourcing, but looking at using things like RFCs as a mechanism to actually get feedback from the community as well. So by having like requests for comments, so you can actually put out there, well, this is our thinking. This is the path that we're planning on going down. Let's get feedback from the community. So in a way, it still allows you to retain control as a sort of platform team, but it invites the comments and the feedback from the users. And if this is just not, this is not helpful, like don't go there type thing. That's the kind of stuff that you really want to hear, to find out, are we actually building the right thing? So to your point, so that your paths do land up being walked. And the key thing is to make sure that you get the feedback and get it out there to find out whether people actually want to walk them. So RFCs, I think in conjunction with inner sourcing is a potential path for that.
Yeah, it's also, I think, in your talk, right, Nicki, you were mentioning don't make the platform mandatory. But I was wondering, like, so in your view, what does this mean? Like, does it mean you should always provide alternatives not to use the platform? Like, what would that look like in practice?
So, I mean, I think in practice, the idea is really to try and entice people onto the platform and not to force them onto the platform. So I think there always has to be an alternative. So, but that doesn't mean that you as a platform team need to provide that. So the challenge with making the platform mandatory is that it does close off some of these feedback loops, because, with product thinking, if you have an optional approach, there's more discussion, more innovation happening, and that gets you closer to building the actual sort of fit for purpose platform that you need. But with mandatory platforms, you sometimes find that teams land up being successful in spite of your platform rather than, sort of because of it. However, does it mean that you need to provide an alternative in every case? No, I don't think so, because that's just a waste of sort of time and effort. What you do need to do, though, is to provide users with the requirements that they would need to meet in order to still comply with things like security and stuff like that. So quite often, I think platforms are mandatory because they're trying to apply things like security and compliance, all these type of things. And so people think, well, there's no way for me to get the developers to do this unless I force them onto my platform and make them do this. But the alternative is to say, well, actually, here is the list of sort of security compliance, or the security rules and the compliance you need to adhere to. If you want to do it yourself, by all means, go ahead. But then you need to liaise with, for example, the security team and make sure that you tick all of those boxes. Whereas if you use the platform, there's some golden paths. There are things that are already approved, and it will go much faster for you. So the sort of mandatoriness, not making it mandatory, is basically trying to entice them, I think, to use your platform rather than their own option. And because there has to be an option to use their own stuff if it doesn't fit. But the idea would be that the platform would make it easier.
Does that add complications and complexity if you allow people to stray off of the platform?
It certainly does, yes. I mean, and that is why you definitely try to make sure that it's hard for them to do that. So, you know, if it's, I think I can't remember whose talk it was, but somebody else talking about, I can't remember which one it was, but they were talking about the fact that they actually do chargebacks sometimes in this case. They said, well, we as a platform team are providing all these services for you, and if you don't use the platform and you need to do it yourself, then you need to engage our services, then we'll need to sort of charge you back for that. So there's kind of ways and means of trying to entice people onto the platform, because the whole reason for having the platform is to try and make sure that you do get people standardized and going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I think there has to be a level of pragmatism though, because, you know, sometimes you do need to do a little bit of sort of forcing, but if you genuinely want to go down this product thinking mindset, it is more about trying to entice people on with a carrot rather than a stick approach.
You know, it's funny. We've seen that so often over the years play out with agile development, for instance, and DevOps. These are non-prescriptive, suggested ways of doing things. And I think that kind of slows uptake of these things and understanding a little bit, where people hear, oh, platform engineering, this is great, but you don't have to do this, that, X, Y, and Z. And it was the same with Agile and the same with DevOps. So I don't know, maybe at first it's better to say, yes, we're going to do it this way. And then as they see, well, if I could do this, that would make it better. And then they meet again, and that's part of the feedback. And they say, okay, well, we'll extend the platform now out in that direction or something. Might be a better approach, but that's, again, just my opinion.
But I think if I'm honest, at least, you know, if we apply this this approach, of which I would be the biggest fan, you know, 80% of our workloads should run on Heroku probably, and people think I'm being paid for saying this because I say it all the time, but I'm not. Like, you know, I'm just saying that, you know, then we should just use a platform as a service in many cases. But I think that. So I think we actually have a great opportunity here, and some of the, you know, the platforms that have been around for a while, if you look at them, what they're saying is that, okay, if you're on the platform, you get a certain set of guarantees, right? If something goes sideways, we will have your back. We have SALs on these things. You know, they're security screened. As long as you're on the path, we got you. You can leave the path. Unfortunately, you're on your own, and we'll call you at 3 a.m. for you to fix that thing that you've built, right? So that is a great incentive. Actually, my observation is that depending on the industry, you know, that will be less in a highly regulated industries, but on the normal average, it's an 80-20 with platforming. 20% of your teams will probably be off the platform and want to explore their own stuff. And I'm questioning whether even from a just philosophical perspective, you can get them there, because these people really care about the low level stuff, and maybe we just let them, right? If you look at Mercado Libre or any of those, like you can see that fraction of the team that just wants to do their own thing. Right. And I would nothing wrong with that per se, I think.
I would absolutely agree with you. Actually, I don't think the platform is. So when I say mandatory, I think it's it's for the right workloads, the right setups. The platform is not necessarily going to be able to do everything for everybody. So there is naturally going to be a subset of people that are just not going to be able to fit on the platform. But I think if it's the 80 or the 90%, that's what you're aiming for, because you're aiming to really scale the majority of the organization up, but you're always going to have those edge cases. And I don't think that will ever change, to be honest. So for me, it's trying to make sure that it's mandatory for the people who it will really benefit, if that makes sense.
It's interesting. It's almost like going to the ocean, and some people are going to do the backstroke, and some people will do a crawl, and some people will do something else, but there'll always be a lifeguard there watching to make sure that nothing bad happens. And then, of course, you always have the swimmers who are going to go in at night when the lifeguard's not even there. And that's creates a whole different problem. But yeah, I like that idea of having the guardrails, the security, we have your back kind of in place. Go ahead and stray, do your own thing, you know, be your own person, because it is a creative effort after all. You know, but to have all those things in place that kind of keep it together, I think that's great. That's the real benefit, I think, of this.
In an ideal world, David, you know, even when they stray, right, it's if they incentivize to sort of contribute their deviations back to the platform, so much the better, right? I think that Nicki used the word inner sourcing. That's a great way. Right? We've seen many organizations where they could deviate, but in many cases they contribute those deviations back to the platform, so the platform actually improves and it benefits the rest of the product teams, right?
Yeah, and if we are thinking about how can we hold ourselves as platform engineers accountable, then this could be a metric, right? Like how many of our internal teams are actually opting for our platform, and it's a metric that's gone when it's mandatory. It's a little bit of a dangerous metric, as Nicki points out, because it's a little bit like front-end test coverage. You know, do you really want 100%? Yeah, probably not, because then you're not striking the right balance. You want something maybe in the area of 80, 90%, so you're not over-indexing. And so, you know, a little bit of a KPI that you need to treat carefully, but one that is definitely an index of the health and quality of the work that we're doing as platform engineers.
I think one of the things that also speak very much talk is that one of the sort of blind spots that people have is that they think that the platform needs to solve for everybody for every single use case. And that's also not the case. Then you build something that's so generic that it doesn't actually help as much, because you're trying to build something that just caters for everybody and you become a jack of all trades and master of none. So it's finding the right use cases, the right target audience, and making sure that it adds value.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Luca, I don't know how much time we have left here, but I would like to find out where these people all think you know, platform engineering is going to be going in the next 6 months or 12 months, or what we can expect going forward.
I'd love to know too. Manju, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. And I think I'll build it on one of the things that I was expecting from this year's PlatformCon, but I was surprised that nobody sort of emphasized it as much, right? Which is making security an integral part of internal developer platforms, right? So we spoke about supporting multiple personas, we mentioned data engineers, but I think in a future PlatformCon, we should see a greater presence of security folks presenting, right? So in fact, I think just today I saw an interesting post by Richard Serrater, right? You know, from Google. So he had an interesting post on that it's not just about shifting left, it's also shifting down, right? So which is about integrating security as part of the platform itself, right? So we talk about paved roads, how you have security guardrails built as part of the platform. So next PlatformCon, that's, you know, my hope is that you'll see a lot more security focused talks. So that's one. Second could be, I think we'll also start seeing platforms becoming more intelligent, right? I think here's another provocative sort of idea, because most of the times when we talk of platforms, it's about externalizing all of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, as we call it, right? So in fact, it makes the platform look like, oh, we take away all of the work that people don't want to do, right? And so the platform ends up becoming a dump pipe, right? It's everything that the developers don't want to do. But in the age of AI, probably, right? That's not necessarily true. So in future, what you'll start seeing is the platform becomes more intelligent, right? It's not just undifferentiated, but it actually provides differentiation, but in a way where it provides differentiation at scale, right? So that, I think, would be an interesting. In fact, maybe in future we could even see a separate track altogether, right? So AI augmented platforms or intelligent IDPs, is what I'd like to see. The last thing could be as these platforms grow, right? What you can imagine is platforms accumulate a lot of data. So in addition to all of the self-service platform capabilities that people use as a service, people would also want to see what is the analytical value of the data that platform holds, right? So if you have a treasure trove of data, right, so you might also want to expose the data as itself as a service, right? So the emergent properties of a platform become as important as just this individual services.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, Nicki, you also mentioned security. Is there any other also like kind of like stakeholders that you see emerging that are coming closer to the platform engineering sphere?
So I think the data, we've already mentioned data coming closer is another big one with ML ops and doing that a little bit better, I think, is definitely on the security front. Integrating security more into the platform and using things like policy as code in even more places is something which I think we will start seeing a little bit more on as that gets more intelligent. So I do think AI and the sort of intelligence side of the platform is something which it's not there at the moment. It's still really kind of new, but I think in time that is something that we will start seeing. So I saw a post by it was the Honeycomb people. They did a blog post and it was entitled "All the Hard Stuff That Nobody Talks About When Building Products with LLMs," and they've looked to integrate natural language into their querying for observability to allow you to ask questions like, what's the slowest sort of that I have, and observability related sort of queries, make it easier for people to ask questions at all levels. And so I think that the ability to sort of add these things into the platform will make it easier for different stakeholders as well to start asking questions of the platform in a more sort of natural way. But it's definitely not there yet. There's still a long way to go. And the thing that I like with that blog post was talking about actually all the challenges around that. So for me, there's challenges, but it's definitely an area to look out for in the future.
Nice. Any other trends worth mentioning that you think?
So, I mean, it's not, maybe not so much a trend, but I just think also just getting better at the basics. So I said in my previous talk, like we're, as engineers, we love all the shiny new tech and playing with, all the toys and everything. But despite all the sort of, all the technical innovation and stuff out there, we're still challenged when it comes to the human scaling factor. And so I think there will be even more sort of innovation and patterns, which I think we'll see coming out about how to scale platform teams and that intersect between people and the platform even more, just to get the basics right, because I don't think we fully get that right now. So evolving what we have now into something that scales even more is something that I expect to continue seeing as a trend as we move forward, with different patterns, different ways of working that will work in different contexts.
Yeah, there's maybe one trend I'd like to highlight, Luca. This year, right? There were a couple talks that focused on FinOps, but maybe next year we should see something around GreenOps, right? Which is how can platforms actually enable green software engineering at scale, right? So you build all of the sustainability practices as part of the platform itself. So individual product teams don't have to worry about making those decisions, right?
Especially given
Nice.
that PlatformCon itself is a very green initiative, right? Because we don't have.
I think
Anything-
that will be. Sorry, that will be really interesting because I think with the multiple stakeholders, there will be conflicting requirements as well. So how to trade off the green ops, the FinOps, the scaling and going faster, that will be quite interesting.
Absolutely. Anything you want to add, Kaspar, before we wrap this up? I realize we ran over quite a bit already.
No, I think I want to. I feel like I'm here to echo, but I want to also really echo Nicki because I think we're in the early days of platform engineering. I think we shouldn't make any mistake there. We are, this is the beginning of a very long journey. I think because we're over-indexed, or I am over-indexing on the people that have done it for a while, the outlier first movers, but those are a couple dozen maybe around the world that have really done it at scale. I'm observing it in the rollouts. We are fluent at rolling out, let's say 100 developers. We're fairly fluent at rolling out 400 or 500 on platforms. We're doing in the 1,000, but that's already outlier. There are not that many people around the world that really have done that. And so there is so much more to learn and so much more to verticalize, and completely with Manju on the security side, but it's going to be incredibly exciting. I've seen the first request database put into LLMs on platforms where you can now ask, hey, what, like tonight, can you give me everything we've now migrated to that new cloud, whatever? And it's a conversational interface. So there is an incredible speed of innovation on the one hand, given with so much necessary foundational work that we still have to do. And I think if I think what's the biggest threat to platform engineering is that we're not really able to nail the fundamentals and really find the patterns that work at scale. And I think we're still not far away, and we are getting better, but we have a lot of legwork to do.
Cool. David, any final remarks from your end? Otherwise, we can wrap this up.
I have none.
Fantastic. Well, then, thank you. And thank you, Nicki, Manju, Kaspar, for joining us. I apologize for anybody that had questions, but we ran out of time. If you want to see more of these amazing speakers, here just posted the link to the Platform Engineering YouTube channel. And we'll see you around. Thank you so much for being a part of this.